Hey, Bart and Jim, thanks for getting together here at TPM 2026 in beautiful city of Long Beach. Bart, you want to do a quick introduction of yourself?
Sure. Bart Muynck. I have my own advisory company, Bart Muynck LLC. Been in the industry about 35 years. Had the good fortune of working both on the 3PL and asset-based side. Started my career in logistics in Europe and then moved on to the shipper side with PepsiCo, where I was for 10 years. Spent 8 years with Gartner on the supply chain research side, and then Project 44 as another tech vendor on the visibility side. Now 2.5 years as independent.
All right. And then Jim, what's your story?
Sure. Jim McCullen, Chief Technology Officer at Century Supply Chain Solutions. Been at Century for 38 years now, so really my whole career in logistics has been Century and building out of our technology, our people, our processes. So it's been pretty exciting. A lot of times people will ask me, how have you stayed in the same role for so long? And it's just that every new customer we bring on has some new challenge, new excitement. And today, what I'm seeing with the technology advances, there's so much more that we can achieve and do in logistics. I'm super excited to be here. And just briefly on Century. Century's a global logistics provider. Our focus is origin cargo management, and I think we're going to talk a little bit about how all this kind of comes together.
Yeah, excellent. Thanks for stepping in and being part of this today.
I would say what you're kind of talking about is quite admirable, right? 38 years, the same company. But then again, I would say if you have a company you work for that's called Century, it kind of breeds longevity, right?
I gotta go 100 years.
So, and hopefully you have the same with the customers, right? But one of the things that I noticed in 35 years in the industry, and kind of as you get older, you become a little bit more reflective. And one of the things I saw is that, in the 90s, early 90s when I started, the industry was a little bit different. And I would say it was a lot less complex because supply chains were a lot more regional. But we've been adding complexity on complexity on complexity. And then we see obviously now more disruptions, whether it's socioeconomic, geopolitical, weather, all of these different things. And something happens, 5,000 miles away, and immediately it impacts your supply chain, right? Your customers that are shipping product, you as supply chains services provider, and also obviously the customer. And when I reflected on that, I see like 3.5 decades, so much has changed in the world, and we are now in a phase where technology is advancing at an incredibly fast pace. But yet, over 3.5 decades, realistically, you come to the conclusion we haven't changed as much as we think we have within supply chains. We're still very conservative in most pockets. We are still very siloed and fragmented, very focused on particular functions. And I would say the collaboration we sometimes have with our other partners isn't also quite evolved to what it is. And part of that is people, part of it is our mindset, part of it is maybe the data we have available that's spread around. 30 years ago, we didn't have any data. Now we almost have too much data, but how do we get easily to it? How do we make sense out of all of it? And so that was really the inspiration behind the new way of thinking, the new mindset, which I called the now philosophy. And a couple of reasons why I call it now. First of all, everyone knows the word now.
Okay.
And so I kind of backwards engineered it to the acronym now. But the biggest part of it is that kind of call for urgency. If you don't think that for 3.5 decades you didn't have to change very quickly, I would say the time is now. Because if you don't change now with the world, how it's continuously changing, how your customers are becoming ever more demanding, then in 3 to 5 years' time, you might not be around anymore. Whether your customers have gone to your competitors who have better offerings, or the fact that maybe you're not as attractive to talent because people are still core of this business, and you have to have the right ways to attract that talent. And we know a couple of things is like with data centers, energy is definitely one of the constraints. Water is one of the constraints, but people are constraints. And we know in our Western cultures that we have an aging population. So how do you have the more limited amount of people? How do you actually use them more efficiently? So the now philosophy is that mindset that really creates that urgency around changing the way you do things. And we'll talk what that means in the individual parts, but then also how to use technology. And I think Century is a great example of a company that's providing services, but that perfectly aligns with those elements that create that new mindset and then underbuild it with the right technology.
All right. I'm curious, you had a background in Gartner, and how does that kind of shade and shape how you've constructed this philosophy?
Yeah, so obviously as an analyst, and I was there for 8 years, you learn to think a little bit differently, right? Because I came from the business and was in operations, and an analyst, you need to look at things a little differently, and you need to be able to step back and get an objective view, but having been on the operations side from the carrier, being on the finance side, I have a background in finance as well, and then being able to also be on the shipper side gave me a fairly broad view. But then when I step back, it's like Gartner's a great company, but if you look in supply chain, things are moving so quickly. And I found that some of the ways that we have been thinking traditionally, and maybe the larger companies like a Gartner, like some of the large consulting companies, the way they still traditionally think of things isn't necessarily fit to today's world, but also some of the technology aspects, right? We all know Gartner's Magic Quadrant and Gartner's market guides, and I used to create those. But you know, these big dinosaurs of applications aren't necessarily fit for today's organizations either. And so when companies go out, whether you look for a technology vendor or you look for a service partner, it isn't always the biggest and most global companies that you need. It's those companies that really can create value. And we've always been talking about things like agility. Which of those partners can really bring you that agility? And sometimes the way we look at things from the bigger perspective, the big services, it's almost the reverse. Yeah, they're like the big oil tankers who it's hard to sink them, but you know, it's also very hard to change course on them and very hard to change their speed. We have to think more in terms of like these nimble speedboats that can go fast when they need to, but very quickly slow down and change course when we need. And that agility is something that I don't always see represented in some of the main stage research out there. And again, I call it a philosophy because it isn't an exact science. Now, the methodology for technology is more of a science, but the thinking about supply chains isn't. That's why I call it philosophy, because people might have different opinions, but also I think depending, and you'll see that, Jim, of your customers, depending on their supply chain, might be quite different from one company to another. So though there are parts where there is a mindset, there are certain things you have to focus on, how you then go and fill that in might be quite different one company.
Speaking of which, so was just at the Century cocktail with some customers and folks last night, and I was speaking with one, and they specifically said that in partnering with Century, that you kind of like fit this Goldilocks sort of solution for them of having the scale and strength of systems, but also being able to move quickly. It very much aligns with what I hear not only you and the executives at Century talk about, but literally hear directly from your customers. So could you elaborate on that, on being that sort of Goldilocks agile solution?
Sure. And it's to Bart's point around the agility side of it and being able to move at speed with new ideas, right? And so, but again, to your point, having that scale and stability to grow into that, right? So you know, it's like any other kind of POC concept, right? We want to build something out, test it, make sure it works quickly, right? And then iteratively interact with the customer to get exactly what they want, and then be able to build it out to the scale that you needed at an enterprise class application. And you know, for me personally, it's been so exciting with the new technology advances that are taking place, right? Because our teams, it's like superpowers for our teams, right? And so not, you know, for our technical teams, absolutely, because they can move so much faster in the development cycles with the different AI tools that are available, but also for our operations teams, our customer facing teams, because they're getting these powers to be able to move faster, get the manual work out of the supply chain processes. And it, you know, it's interesting too, because you know, the talk of agentic AI and where it's headed, and we're seeing, you know, great advances in areas of logistics right now, but logistics is still a relationship based business. And so it's that combination of being able to apply the technology to be able to empower our teams to deliver to the customers.
So there's a sort of foundational or cornerstone piece of technology that you all have there at Century called Visive, and I would like to kind of hear a little bit about what it is and kind of what you think makes it so powerful.
Sure. So Visive is our operating platform. It's our global visibility platform. I think one of the unique pieces of it is, number one, it's ours, so we can take it in any direction that we want to. And in all honesty, the direction that Visive takes is based on the demands of our customers. And so rather than us going out to try to build something that we think solves a problem, we build based on what we know customers need help with to solve, right? And then we can scale that out across all of our customers. And that's really what I was talking about earlier in the length of my career at Century, that excitement of being able to listen to a customer, understand their pain points, and recognize that we can solve them. And it may be with the technology that we have in place already, or it may be with something that we need to go out and build. And now with the tools that are available, we can prototype new applications in days or hours even in cases, and start to share that with the customer. So when you think back to the days of of, okay, we're going to create a whole bunch of wireframe diagrams and we're going to present that to a user, and then they're going to come back, and then our product team's going to go through a whole bunch of spec creation, and then our developers are going to build it, and then it's going to come back and forth, right? Now we can create the application, show it to you, and say, is this what you're talking about? No, I want to change this, I want to change that. Okay, is this it? Yes, right? And so the value that we can bring is so much more powerful than it was in the past. So sorry, sidetracked a little bit there, but Visiv as a whole, again, it's our operating platform. So every office around the world that Century operates is using Visiv to manage every step in the supply chain. All of our customers' vendors are in the platform every day, creating bookings, commercial invoices, packing lists, all of those documents that need to flow through the supply chain. Our customers are in there. It's their single source of truth. It's their visibility platform, but yet it can still feed their ERP systems and other technologies that they may need in-house. We bring together all of the data the customer needs. So when you think about all the milestone events and tracking that comes from carriers and ports and truckers and all of those kind of things, we bring that all together, we cleanse it, and we bring it to the customer so they don't have to go anywhere else to get it. And so Visiv becomes our operating platform, their control and visibility platform, and more importantly, with where we're headed with everything from an agentic perspective, that cleansed, trusted data source that you need to be able to drive those automations.
There was a keyword that you mentioned there, and Bart, you've got me like programmed now. I can't hear the word now without thinking about it. So in light of what Jim was just describing of their strategy at Century, can you go through what those three letters N, O, and W stand for, and pick some ways to align with what Century's doing?
Definitely, and I'm glad Jim actually started the conversation because it makes it easier for me, right? But yeah, the N starts for networked intelligence, and you hit it right on the head. One source of truth, right? A lot of companies don't really have that intelligence end to end, right? To say, hey, I've got parts of my data, but how do I really get that one source of truth from my entire supply chain cycle that I'm controlling? The O stands for orchestrated agility, right? Because it's not just getting the data, getting the insights, but it's then what can you do with it? So something happens over the weekend. We had a fairly large event with the Israel-US strikes in Iran. Immediately that has impacts with some of the straits. They're now closed. There's no fly zone. So from an air perspective, from an ocean perspective, from a port perspective, that has huge impacts from suppliers being shut down. How do you immediately act to that? It's not good enough, I'm assuming, for you to go to a customer saying, hey, you're going to have issues with these containers. They go, well, I already knew that. You don't have to have a crystal ball to know that. But saying, here's what you should do to kind of counteract and execute based on that information. And then the W, especially in the US, the W is one of the most important parts because if you're a football fan, when we say the W, that's the win, right? So where does the win come from is really wide angle, called visibility, called transparency. But really being able to have kind of access to data coming from all across, and it's not just from your own supply chains, maybe from your partners, etc., to really truly build that one underlying layer of data. And that's a little bit how that mindset is different as well, because again, traditional linear supply chains kind of have that thinking of segregation of functional. And I will say, to be honest, and that's my opinion, but I would say supply chains were always a little bit of a mirage, a fallacy. I've been now in this industry for 3.5 decades. And if you look at supply chain, what it's supposed to be, a chain is a perfect connection of all these links. Remember when we were all kids and we used to ride bikes? Some of us might still ride bikes, although now it's a lot of electric bikes, especially here. But a bike, if you have a chain and there's one link that's not connected, immediately the propulsion stops and your bike's not going to move very far. So if you look at supply chain, I've never seen a company where all these links perfectly attach. So supply chain was a great idea, but it really didn't quite work because we never had the mindset of all of us collaborating. Now, I did see a great move forward during the start of COVID when people had to react. And I saw so many companies that every morning had meetings, bringing together all of those functions and truly collaborate. But then when we thought that COVID was over, we went back to our old ways of doing things. And that's the thing now. We shouldn't think in these linear supply chains. We really need to think as connected ecosystems, and that really requires that kind of wide angle transparency, visibility, and how you achieve that with partners. You together with your customers, not you versus the customer or you and the customer. How do you partner with companies around?
And that, from our standpoint, that orchestration is such a key component of what Century delivers, right? So Yes, can our customers go out and connect with carriers and transport providers and all these different players? They can, but why? And we do it across all of our customer base, so we get so much more value out of that collective group. And so when you think about the importance of that data, if as Sentry, because we're out there orchestrating it, so bringing in what's happening with the vendor community, bringing in your data from your ERP system, what's happening with the transport providers, so that, to your point, when something goes wrong, we've got all of the data there that we need to be able to make decisions in real time and adjust the supply chain, right? So if I understand what your inventory levels are, if I understand what your priority products are, and we're in a crisis situation, I know what needs to move first, right? I don't have to wait until the next day from Asia to the US to find out, do you want me to ship this cargo or that cargo, right? Because there's only, you have 100 slots that you have booked and we can only get you 25 because of this situation that's materializing, right? So having all that data at your fingertips, it allows us to be that orchestrator on behalf of our customers, and it really takes that pressure off of them, right? So to your point, when there's a critical situation taking place, our customers are logging into Visiv in the morning and they're seeing our supply chain alerts saying, hey, there's a situation with this vessel. Here's the containers you have on it. Here's what it's going to do to impact it, right? If that vessel is going to be diverted somewhere else, we're already communicating with them, even on the inbound DC side of things, to say okay, how are we going to get that stuff off the port to the right DC, because it's no longer calling the port it was intended to call. And so all of those things are so reliant on having the kind of complete data set view to be able to make decisions in real time.
Yeah, and I would say the data isn't just the technical part or technological part, right? Because people say, well, isn't that then that W, isn't that part of the technology? No, because it's really the mindset. Because a lot of companies have a lot of good data. Where I would say the gap is going from having the data, having the right insights, knowing what to do, and then the ability to go and execute it. Or if you're executing that in real time. And that's now where we're seeing that technology come into place to say it is event driven, which is the E in the new methodology, is having the ability to do either prescriptive. So I already have the data. I can prescribe certain things and you as a person can make the decision, or certain things we can probably create more autonomous. So we know what to do, and we can say certain tasks we can just push out. Right? If there's something that's happened and we need to take action, we know how to take that action. We don't have to wait for a person to do it. We can go and do that. So, and again, but it's also not technology versus the people, right? It's people empowered by the technology.
Superpowers.
It's a collaboration. Exactly. But it's a little bit like, Jim, in the 90s, right? When people first had personal computers. Everyone said, we're all going to lose our job because we're going to be replaced by personal computers. Guess what? We all still have a job and we're all using personal computers. And we couldn't imagine not having a personal computer because we understood what we can do with it, how it makes our jobs different, but better and more efficient. And that's now where AI comes in. It's how do we use these same technologies to kind of take that level of technology to the next phase. But again, it has to go hand in hand. I would say the challenge now more than ever is that the speed of technology is way faster than our ability to keep up. So I talk about kind of two speeds, economic speeds of our operational pain points, our fear of changing and the change management around it, our kind of opposition to doing things differently or just having to think differently. But a lot of it is perception. That's why the people part is so central to it. It's not just about just apply some technology against it and it will work, but how do you train the people? How do you have the right partners to kind of accelerate the adoption to make that easier? And I think that's why for companies working with the right partner, it's such a big difference, because I think first of all, it takes a little bit of the pressure off them. And when you do that with many different companies and truly as a partner, it kind of takes the barrier to the adoption of that. And I think that is the way for companies to start using technology more, is making it easier to use what's already built.
And to jump in on the change management piece a little bit, it is, as you said, so much more dramatic today because of the speed of technology. And as organizational leaders, we need to recognize that, and we need to be working with our teams, whether it's through departments that are focused on change management, thinking about the workflows, right? So the workflows on how people do things are going to change, definitely. And the AI solutions will bring in these new capabilities, and it'll adjust what someone's doing. So I'll just use marketing as an example. In the past, our marketing team might spend a lot of time creating PowerPoint slides, for presentations and organizing them. Well, there's great AI solutions out there that can create the decks and create 8 variations of it and create it based on a story that a salesperson wants to tell. So now that brings that marketing team back to an even more important role, which is they've got to be able to collect and harness all the information about the company to share with these AI tools so that they can generate the right content, right? So like we come back to this value of data. And so I think just from an expertise standpoint, the more you can get involved in truly understanding the business, understanding the data that drives that business, the more valuable you're going to be, because that's the fuel of AI, is that data, that trusted data, right? So yeah, I think change management will be a big play throughout this, but we're headed there.
Speaking of where we're headed, so we're here at the beginning of 2026 right now, and at the beginning of a year, every company kind of comes out with what their big push is going to be, what their focus for the next year is going to be. Curious what that looks like at Century, and then kind of just to wrap things up, I'd bring that home, Bart, with kind of some context and color on what Jim says about what's coming up for Century.
Sure, absolutely. So we've got some great AI tech that we're delivering now to our customers, and it's more targeted tool sets. Like we have an AI routing engine that can take in all of the customers' information, their routes, their carrier contracts, their due dates, their costs, and make the routing decisions instead of a person doing that, right? And it's interesting, I was having a discussion with a very large importer yesterday, and it made them realize, like, you know what, Jim, we're doing all this work ahead of it to kind of tell you how to book things. And if we could get out of your way, the AI technology could do that, right? And so in some cases, we're limiting the capabilities of these tools because we're trying to control them too much, right? Instead of giving them the guardrails, giving them the goals and what we want to achieve, and then letting these AI solutions deliver on that. So lots of targeted solutions around document audit and translation, and collecting and standardizing information. And to come back to what Bart said earlier, when you think about this ecosystem of supply chain, everybody's talking a little bit differently, right? And so is a POD a proof of delivery, or is a POD port of discharge, right? And so like you need to understand that. And then even when you get into like location information and all of that, there's so many different languages going on that need to be kind of brought together. That's where AI can be extremely powerful. But for us, certainly on the agentic standpoint, we've done a ton of automation across the supply chain. And a lot of that has been across the kind of happy path, right? When things are going in the right steps and orders, you can automate it and it's more code-based, right? Now we're bringing intelligence into that to be able to say, for example, just give you one on the carrier booking process. If we book with an ocean carrier and they come back and give us a different vessel than we requested, right? Okay, that's normally would be a problem somebody has to look at. Why? Agentic AI can go in there and from an intelligence perspective look at it and say, you know what, this is still going to arrive on the right time. It's in this next vessel, so let it go, right? It's fine. We don't need anybody to step in. If there's a problem, it can figure out who to communicate with, or it can bring it back to an operator. So for us at Century, absolutely layering in the agentic solutions within our platform, but still recognizing that human in the loop and the power that we give them through these technologies.
Yeah, Bart, bring it on home.
Yeah, so from my perspective, right, it's obviously it's the year where companies more and more have to use technology. You might just get the question from the board, what are we doing on AI, or are we using AI? Because I hear that pretty much every week. The other part is, what are the use cases we can work on? And it's like you said, Jim, people want something that they can put in place very quickly and can really prove out. Because again, doing that quickly gives the value, but it also gives them an element where they can go and leadership can communicate that throughout the company. And again, that will bring the barriers to adoption down. That's the only thing, right? With AI, the sky's the limit, but we are the ones that are in our own way. It's that change, right? So when we lower that by taking into account the people, the right leadership, the right focus, start with a simple use case, but also train your people, right? I mean, I'm in rooms and I'm talking to operators and I say, so who here uses AI? Who here understands AI? They don't, because no one's trained them on it, right? If you're in operations, in technology. And so they're afraid of it. And they have that mentality, it's coming for my job. But when they really see that it's helping them in their job, and at the end of the day, they're gonna like their job even better. Because they go, you know that one thing that I had to do, but I had to do it 100 times over? I don't have to do that anymore. I can do the stuff where I really feel valued in my job. And again, that's something that people aspect is so important. Looking at the people and training about the people is definitely something companies need to focus on a lot more this year.
And just to jump on that for one quick second too, when you think about training, there's technical, tactical training, like how do I use Copilot, how do I use ChatGPT? But there's a bigger level of that too. It's understanding what AI means to the business, how it can add value. And just a quick shout out to FreightPath. They've got all different types of logistics training packages, and they've got a whole series now focused on AI. And it's at a higher level because we need people to understand what is the concept of this? How is this going to impact the business? And then they can drill down into how do I use this tool or that tool?
Exactly. And then the other part is obviously how do you have that vision around it, right? So the vision obviously comes from leadership, but part of it is also empowering your people, meaning it's not just something that comes from the top down. Is how do you create an organization, the right culture of innovation? Meaning that if you have like younger people who think technology first, right? Maybe the older people go like, I'm just used to be doing it because we've been doing it like that for 3 or 4 decades. But young people who come into an organization, I see that on the shipper side, and they're in college doing supply chain studies, hearing about API and AI, and then they come into a company and it's Access Database, Excel, and EDI, and they go,
Right.
what happened to
what
the cool technology? And they're the ones that are, so also listen to them because they might have some great ideas to contribute. And at the end of the day, when you create that, the one problem we see, like on the shipper side, maybe on the carrier side, people will say we have too many people because so many of the tasks are manual and you can automate certain workflows. I have never seen a shipper the last 2 years that said we have too many people because what happens is someone leaves, someone retires, they don't get backfilled. So
Right.
people just have more and more work to do. So how do we make it more efficient so that the people who are there will kind of like their job better so their talent retention goes up? But they're also really good at attracting talent, right? There's a lot of industries today where when we probably came out of college, we would go to the consulting companies, big automotive companies. We want to go work there. Kids today, they don't want to work for Uber and Google. So how do you attract them to certain industries? Well, technology can be, and that culture of innovation can be one way to attract them. But the main thing is, and again, that's where, again, the urgency comes in, and the whole thing, the mindset of the now philosophy is change your mindset, but you got to do it now. I'm not saying you got to do it all overnight, but start by thinking about it. Start talking to your partners about it. Start using some of the things your partners already have, but you got to start now because, and I use that analogy of the marathon. When you ask people what's the hardest part in the marathon, most people will say it's that last mile because you're exhausted. And I always go, no, it's getting to the starting line because many of us will never run a marathon. It's that training, getting ready to it and having the guts to do it. It's the same with supply chain. The hardest part of the change is starting the change. But it has to start now or in 3 to 5 years' time. Not only will you not be able to do the business you're doing today because the people will have left. And if you want to grow, you're not going to be efficient
Well, you're
enough.
not going to be relevant with your customers at that point. To your point, these are the boardroom discussions that need to be taking place to really understand, like, what is this impact to the company and how do we embrace it and move forward with it, right? For companies that aren't doing that this year, they're going to be behind.
Maybe final sort of word here, and again, it's so ironic and it's such good timing that all of this is taking place right now because I just had Eric Caldwell, the CEO of Century, on my podcast the other day, and there was a particular line that he said that has stuck with me, and I've been repeating it and parroting it out every time I've had the opportunity to, which is that if you don't think you are a year ahead of your competition when it comes to AI and technology, then you're probably 2 years behind. And I think that's like a great sort of bow to put on this conversation here because, Jim, that is very much the seat that you sit in, being in charge of technology there. And then Bart, it very much overlaps with now in the philosophy that you're coming through with. And so I think this was a great discussion. I think we could have gone on for much further.
Exactly.
We'll have to hang around for chapter 2 another day then.
Sounds great.
Yeah, thanks guys.
Good talking to you.
Thanks, Nathan.
Bye.